morning, everybody. My endorphins right now are like through the roof. I am just so excited to be here today. Today is just such an important day. We come together as concerned citizens, leaders in our respective fields, and public servants to discuss efforts aimed toward eliminating the scourge opioid misuse has had on loved ones, families, communities, and our state. Welcome, Governor Charlie Baker, Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito, members of justice and law enforcement, fire and rescue, healthcare providers, other stakeholders, and members of our Gosnold family to engage in an open discussion on our progress addressing the needs of our community in relation to the opioid crisis and other problems pertaining to substance misuse. Governor, Lieutenant Governor, I would like to take a precious minute or two to introduce key people leading the community effort to eradicate the deadly effects of opioid misuse on the Cape and the islands. First, a warm welcome to Senator Vinnie DiMacedo. Thank you. And because we are somewhat crowded today, which is really nice to see, if you could stand if you're sitting, just so that people can take note. Kathleen Palmer, legislative aide to David Vieira. Thank you. State Representative, State Rep Will Crocker. State Rep Dylan Fernandez. State Rep Randy Hunt. I'm also going to apologize in advance if I leave anybody important out, but we had to close the rosters at a certain time, so I'm going to put that out there. Good morning also to Barnstable County Sheriff Cummings and Special Sheriff Jeff Perry. The Barnstable County Sheriff's Office is a steadfast supporter of the prevention, education, and intervention efforts we have at Gosnold. Sheriff? Greetings to Cape and Islands District Attorney Michael O'Keefe. Thank you for joining us. From Barnstable Police Department, Chief Matthew Sonnabend and Sergeant Jennifer Ellis. From Brewster Police Department, Detective Sergeant Paul Judge, Detective Jacob Zontini, and Officer Matt Marshall. From Brewster. From Dennis, Sergeant Kenneth Galnett, Officer Ryan Carr, and Officer William Sullivan. Dennis. From Eastham, Officer Andy Williams, and from Eastham Fire Department, Chief Farenkoff and Deputy Chief Dan Keene. From the Harwich Police Department, Detective Sergeant Bob Brackett, and from Harwich Fire Department, Chief Norman Clark. From Mashpee Police Department, Chief Scott Carleen. From Mashpee Fire Department, Chief Thomas Rullo. From Truro Police Department, that must have been a long ride this morning, Officer Sarah Lake. Thank you, Sarah. From Lockley Police Department, Detective Geraldine LaPence. From Yarmouth Fire Department, Mr. James Robert. And last but not least, from our host town of Falmouth, Chief Edward Dunn and Captain Jeffrey Smith. Also from our host town of Falmouth, Fire Department Chief Michael Small. In the back there. On behalf of Gosnold, I want to extend my gratitude to key community partners who work on the front lines every day in conjunction with law enforcement, rescue, and Gosnold staff, intervening in the lives of people who are simply ravaged by the disease of addiction. So I'd like to thank some of those partners now. Thank you to Juliet Fay from Martha's Vineyard Community Services. Clark from Provincetown Health Department. And Terry Ahern from Cape Cod Healthcare. And finally, I want to welcome and thank the members of our Gosnold family, governance, leadership, management, and recovery management staff who are here today to hear from you, Governor Baker, and also to share with you insights from the field on how our efforts are working. Would members of our Gosnold family please stand? Thank you for all you do each and every day to support our important Gosnold mission. So I will turn the floor over in a moment to Richard Kukuru with this final sentiment. Today we convene in an intimate setting. By doing so, we recognize the contributions of each of you. You and your teams in law enforcement, emergency response, emergency departments, and nonprofit organizations are the front line in our work addressing the opioid crisis. Today we get personal because the work we do each and every day could not get more personal. When we read the obituary of another life lost to this opioid problem, most of us recognize the name, we know the person, we have likely at some point consoled, comforted, or supported their family. I know at Gosnold, we learn of these terrible death notices and we feel it viscerally. Sometimes you can hear it audibly in our hallways as the terrible news travels through our agency. I knew that kid. What a nice kid. Her mom and dad were so caring. I'm heartbroken for them. But it's also important for us to consider that there are so many who recover, so many who get well and thrive. It's truly magnificent, and it does keep us going. There are upwards of 15 of these courageous souls from Gosnold in the room today, and likely more among the rest of you. People who have found a new appreciation for life and their meaning in the world. People so grateful for their life that they choose to invest their energies into helping others. It is pretty fantastic. So today is personal. It gives all of us the opportunity to share with Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito the state of affairs here on the Cape and Islands, the strengths and the vulnerabilities from our frontline perspective. Thank you, and I look forward to a great morning.
Thank you, Beth. My name is Richard Kukuru, and I am the President and CEO of Gosnold. Thank you for coming today. What promises to be an informative discussion with Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito. Today we focus on our Cape and Islands community response to the opioid crisis and how well we are desperately seeking help, how well we are doing addressing the complex needs of people who are desperately seeking help for their substance use and associated mental health challenges. As community partners, we join together in a variety of ways that help people become well and stay well. We know this journey is not an easy one. Regrettably, Barnstable and Duke counties are still rated at the highest level per capita for opiate-related overdose deaths, though we know the availability of Narcan is helping us all save lives. Before I turn the floor over to Governor Baker, let me tell you a few ways we're making a profound difference in the lives of people struggling with the disease of addiction and mental health challenges, often associated with substance use disorders. First, we focus on our treatment efforts on the full continuum of care, encouraging our patients to enter into detox and then move through a customized treatment program designed to meet their unique needs. This may include intensive residential supports at Gosnold and Katomet, extended residential care at the Miller House for Men or Emerson House for Women, partial hospitalizations at Gosnold location in Centerville, Stoughton, intensive outpatient groups, school-based services, outreach counseling, telemedicine, and psychiatric services, including medication-assisted treatment. Gosnold's outpatient services are growing, and we face the common challenge of trying to keep our waiting list down in order to provide swift access to services for patients and their families. Gosnold's recovery management services are recognized as the best around. I'm going to mostly focus on recovery management because our coaching staff are instrumental in helping our patients sustain lasting recovery. These staff serve as outreach workers who act in response to non-fatal overdoses, family interventionists, recovery coaches, emergency department navigators, family support facilitators, community outreach workers, and prevention experts. Our community team is top-notch. Many of these staff are mature in their own recovery. Their lived experience in combination with intensive training and supervision makes them extraordinary. Extraordinary people doing extraordinary work 24/7. Second, Gosnell takes very specific action to create access to pathways to treatment. We have some key staff who regularly outreach to our communities. They are here today to share their experiences with you, Governor Baker. Lenny Cardoza, who is our principal liaison with law enforcement and conducts post-overdose interventions. Christoph Pinatowski, who serves as the key resource for community and families. Patrick Kent, who leads Gosnell's emergency department navigation services. Kevin Rosario, who serves as community educator and resource for schools, community groups, hospitals, healthcare systems, and the recovery community. And Gosnell's active team of recovery coaches who help people in need access and use available services. Their work is commendable, and they help hundreds and hundreds of individuals every year. It's hard to keep track of Kevin Rosario. Last year, Kevin alone paved the way to treatment for 200 individuals. Our post-overdose intervention efforts, conducted side by side with a plainclothes police officer, are having great impact. Since we started the program in 2015, our intervention teams have conducted 573 interventions. We have steadily grown this program and now work with 29 police departments. 75% of individuals who receive a post-overdose intervention accept some form of treatment. Our goal is to encourage detox services as a first step when we can, though we know not everyone is ready for acute treatment services. 51% of post-overdose interventions result in admission to a detox program. I would like to thank all the law enforcement who join us with Gosnell to make these outcomes possible. Emergency departments are another key access pathway. Under the direction of Pat Kent, Gosnell is now embedded within South Shore, Falmouth, Cape Cod, Beth Israel Deaconess here in Plymouth, hospital emergency departments. Related to our work in Falmouth and Cape Cod hospitals specifically, Gosnell has conducted 525 interventions since the program's inception in 2016. Of the 525 interventions, 353 patients, or 67%, were connected to substance use treatment right from the ED. This is a wonderful program. It decreases ED boarding, promotes transfer to the most appropriate level care, and begins a recovery-based conversation with the patient on how to engage with a formal treatment program that can really change the course of their lives. Gosnell's family intervention and support services offer education, support, and comfort to families and also provide a gateway to services. We offer 6 family support groups per week at locations in Stoughton, Scituate, Falmouth, Centerville, Harwich, and even Nantucket, providing 288 groups per year. Substance use disorders are chronic diseases and require family involvement and support. Finally, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our recovery management staff. Gosnell's recovery coaching program started in 2012 with one coach. We now have a robust team of coaches who hold state and national certifications. Under this program, coaching patient outcomes have steadily improved. Participation in medication-assisted treatment increased from 39% to 45%. 12-step participation increased from 70% to 99%. Sobriety time increased from 21% to 79%. And admissions to detoxification, hospital, residential treatment have also significantly decreased. In short, recovery coaches help our patients get well and stay well. Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, we clearly do not do this work alone. Addressing the devastation left in the wake of the substance use truly takes a coordinated community effort. Gosnell works with more than 200 community partners, like the Heron Project, Recovery Without Walls, school systems on and off Cape Cod, the Barnstable County Sheriff's Office, police and fire departments, Habitat OPCO, Martha's Vineyard Community Services, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket Cottage, Falmouth, and Cape Cod hospitals, and the Department of Mental Health, Community Health Centers of Cape Cod Healthcare, and Cape Cod Healthcare Foundation, and countless more. Many of our partners are here today, eager to hear from you, Governor Baker, to thank you for the great work you have done in mobilizing resources to fight this crisis, to share with you their insights from the field, and to learn more from you about your vision for the future. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to Governor Charlie Baker.
Thank you very much, Robert, and I just want to say how much we appreciate the work and the effort and the creativity and the imagination that Gosnell brings to what they do every day on behalf of the people they serve and the people who work there. I do want to start by pointing out that Tim Whalen's also here, state rep on the Cape. Biggest, huge impossible to miss. I felt like something like that. Let me start with this. The Lieutenant Governor and I have talked on a number of occasions about the fact that we didn't get into this race in 2014 to work on this issue. It just found us wherever we were campaigning. People would come up and speak to us about it. And generally speaking, that's the way they did it. They wouldn't talk about it in this kind of a crowd. They would come up afterwards. And I think in many ways that was because of the difficulty associated with the stigma that's associated with this issue. And I remember watching a HBO documentary at one point where a mom who was dealing with this issue with one of her kids said, you know, if my kid had cancer, everybody in the neighborhood would be showing up every night with a casserole and a dessert, and it would be sort of something the neighborhood would take on in its entirety. But the fact that my kid is dealing with addiction, it's very isolating. I don't like to talk about it. Other people don't like to talk about it. It's sort of a secret. And if we've been successful at anything, I would hope one of the things we've been able to do over the course of the past few years is to help bring this one out of the shadows and to make it part of a public discussion about a significant public health issue and all the opportunities and issues we have and the challenges we face that are associated with dealing with this as a public health issue because it is a disease, and in many cases, the people who end up dealing with this got there because they took the advice of a trusted clinical advisor. And I don't think we should ever forget that, particularly when you're talking about opioids. An enormous number of the people who end up dealing with this terrible addiction got there because they did what somebody in the medical community told them to do. There was a story that somebody sent me this morning from the New York Times. I don't know what day it's from. I'm assuming it was today. But it was early in the morning, so I actually didn't look at the date on it. But it basically said that in 2017, there were 72,000 opioid deaths in the U.S. And it had a chart of the United States on it. And it's a sea of yellow and orange. And in this particular chart, yellow and orange means the number of people who died in your state went up last year. There were a handful of states that were light blue or light purple or purple, which meant your number of deaths went down last year. It was literally like 4 or 5 states that showed a decline in deaths. Literally all the rest went up. Thankfully, Massachusetts, thanks to the hard work of a lot of people, including many of the people in this room, our death rate went down. And that was noted early in the story, I think because in part we were early into this and we've been aggressive about pursuing a collaborative approach to dealing with it. And I say all the time that after 10 years of nothing but double-digit increases in overdose and deaths and prescriptions, we saw a little bit of progress in 17. That trend seems to be continuing in 18 with respect to deaths and prescriptions. But we still have terrible issues with overdoses. And the other thing that was quite clear in this story in the Times was the presence of fentanyl in so many of the deaths. Fentanyl wasn't even on the radar, really, in Massachusetts in 2012-13. 2014, and it's now responsible for about 75 or 80% of all the deaths in Massachusetts. And this is going to be, I think, in some respects, one of the new challenges that we're all going to face, and I'll get to this one in a minute, which is how do we deal with the constant change with respect to what the challenge we face looks like. And when Gosnell talks about prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery, that's a fairly similar way of talking about how we've been dealing with this issue in Massachusetts. Our original platform was built on prevention, education, treatment, and recovery, and we did a whole bunch of things there that I think have made a difference. We're still the only state in the country where you can't graduate from medical school, nursing school, dental school, pharmacy school, or social work school without taking and passing a course in opioid therapy and pain management. We're also one of the only states in the country where if you're a prescriber, you can't get relicensed as a prescriber without taking and passing a course in opioid therapy and pain management. It's a shock to me that in a country that in 2014 wrote 240 million opioid prescriptions, and at which point in time this terrible epidemic was raging from one end of the US to the other, the vast majority of the people who wrote prescriptions never took a course, either in practice or in graduate school, in opioid therapy and pain management. And frankly, that's still the case today. If you don't live in Massachusetts, you don't practice in Massachusetts, that's probably not the case for you. And we've actually communicated both verbally and in writing with a lot of our colleagues at the federal level and said, come on, boys and girls, you need to put in place some legitimate education requirements for graduate school students and for prescribers when it comes to dealing with this stuff. Because the simple truth of the matter is the overprescribing, the misuse, and the casual prescribing of this stuff has a lot to do with how we got into this mess in the first place. And the second thing we did with respect to prevention was we dramatically simplified and enhanced the quality of our prescription monitoring program. And that has made a really big difference. At this point, we believe we're somewhere around 96% of all the prescriptions that are getting written in Massachusetts are going through that prescription monitoring program, which does two things. The first is it gives the prescriber a pretty good sense about the person they're actually writing the prescription for with respect to what other kind of medications they may be on a Schedule II, Schedule IV basis. The second thing it does is it shows them where they fit relative to their peers with respect to the way they prescribe generally. And those two things are both equally important. Making sure that a provider or prescriber knows where they are relative to their peer group is a really good way to help educate them about whether they're prescribing on terms and in a way that's consistent with the way others are who are doing similar kinds of things. And the second is providing them with detailed information with respect to how that person who is seeking the prescription is actually accessing and using these meds in the first place. With respect to intervention and education, part of the way I got educated on this was by talking to a lot of folks in EDs and a lot of EMTs, a lot of folks in the law enforcement community, and the reason for that is they are in many cases, and still are, the sort of tip of the spear with respect to how this issue was first recognized here in Massachusetts and in many other places. And when I started hearing about it, one of the first things I did was I went and visited an ED where I knew a lot of the docs there, and I said, I'm hearing about this everywhere I go. It shows up in practically every diner and every town hall and every conversation I have. What's going on? And they were the ones who said to me, yep, it's a crisis. And I asked them why they weren't sort of speaking out about that. And they said, look, I'm just trying to manage what's going on here. And frankly, I'm not sure a lot of people want to talk about this. And when I talk to folks who are EMTs, when I talk to folks in law enforcement, I got the same message, which is we are dealing with this more and more and more every single day. It's everywhere. And I heard that no matter what part of Massachusetts I was in, what community I was in, what neighborhood I was in, which is where we really started to get a sense by comparing notes with the LG and me and with others about how widespread this problem was. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for the work that you do here, because you have saved an extraordinary number of lives over the course of the past decade. And a lot of that's been done without getting anywhere near the kind of public attention that in some respects I believe you deserve for the work that you've done. With respect to treatment and recovery, we've dramatically expanded the state's investment. 70% increase over the past 4 years in state spending on a whole variety of programs and initiatives associated with treatment and recovery. And I won't talk about all of them. I'm just going to talk about a couple because I want to build on something that Gosnold's up to. We started embedding recovery coaches in ERs just to see what would happen, to see if some of these folks could actually get folks into treatment. And we had them in 6 or 7 different hospitals, and about 80% of the time, which is pretty consistent with your numbers, they could get somebody into treatment. Now, whether or not they'd stick with treatment that time or not, numbers were a lot lower. But the bottom line was, somebody can't get better if you can't get them into treatment to begin with. And for some people, it'll take more than one shot, and I get that. And it's always troubled me a little, to tell you the truth. And when it comes to almost everything else in life, we always say to people, you know, really hard things, to do really hard things, usually somewhere along the way, you fall down. Usually somewhere along the way, you fail. Usually somewhere along the way, things don't go exactly the way you planned, but you have to get back up and try it again. Now, from the time I was this tall, I heard that. From every coach I ever had, from every teacher I ever had, from my mom and my dad. You know, son, hard things are hard. Sometimes you fall down. Get back up. Except in this particular space, when somebody goes into treatment and they fail, we blame them more often than not. Not you, but the cognoscenti, for lack of a better word. These people are trying to do something hard, really hard. And if they fall down, the same rule should apply to them that applies to everything else. Let's help them get back up. Failure is usually a part of success. And we should recognize and understand that when it comes to a lot of the outreach that Gosnold's up to, when it comes to treatment, and a lot of the experiments we did with recovery coaches in ERs, not everybody's going to take the first time. You don't always know when you're going to succeed. A few years ago, Marty Walsh, who's the mayor of Boston, he's been in recovery for a very long time, talked about one of his trips to Gosnold. And he said, I went there to take the heat off. I wasn't planning to get sober. I just went there because everybody was all over my back. And I thought I'd go there for a few days until the heat was off, and then I'd go back, but maybe a little less to what I was doing before. And he said, I've been through this routine a whole bunch of times with a bunch of different programs. And he said, but for whatever reason, this time, it stuck. And he's been sober ever since. It's a heck of an admission for a public person to make, but it was very familiar with the one I've heard many times in my conversations. And that's why I think in some respects what you folks are trying to do by helping people get into treatment early and recognizing that it may not stick that time, it may be the next time or the time after. That's a far more effective way to help people deal with this than waiting until they really are in a terrible place and in a terrible way. Which brings me to the legislation we just signed. We've done 2 big bills in Massachusetts on addiction and on opioids. One in 2016 and another one several weeks ago. Both of them passed the legislature unanimously. They were bipartisan every step of the way. And both of them involved a lot of back and forth between the House and the Senate, the administration of the Senate, and the administration of the House, and those were sometimes loud and aggressive conversations. But they were conversations. Nobody was trying to win an argument here. People were trying to have a conversation and come up with a plan of attack that everybody could agree to. And I'm grateful that I live in a state where people have those kinds of conversations, because there's plenty of places around this country these days where people who don't agree on everything seem to have a hard time agreeing on anything. That doesn't seem to be the way it works here. But in this particular bill, there's two things I want to speak to. The first is the statutory requirement that we create a credentialing program for recovery coaches. There's a lot of different flavors of recovery coaching at this point. And it's our hope that if we can create a credentialing program around this and some structure around it, we can get it paid for in ways that up until now, it's been difficult for people to get it paid for. And really embed it as a fundamental part of how we think about treating addiction generally, and especially opioid addiction. And the second thing I wanted to speak to was the decision for the first time to create opportunities to use medication-assisted treatment in certain correctional settings. And I would argue the way the legislature set this up, which is on a demo basis and primarily associated with folks who are going to be involved in short stay, and when I say short stay, I mean sort of 2 years or less, type circumstances, that this is a great opportunity for us to help people get clean while they do their time and provide them with a runway of support when they come out, so that they don't end up, when they come out, right back in the same difficult place that they found themselves in before they were incarcerated in the first place. The bill does a lot of other things which I won't get into here. Happy to talk about it during the conversation. But the final point I want to make, we didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. And I've never seen anything, and I've been in and out of government and in and out of healthcare for most of my professional career, that has the scale and the energy in a negative way that this does. And I do believe we are starting to bend the trend in a positive direction. I do believe we are doing many of the right kinds of things to deal with this. But I also believe that this is a public health crisis and an epidemic that is not going to go away unless we are persistent and determined and creative and together in the way we deal with it. And at some point it will probably get out of the headlines. I don't know when that will be. But it's important for all of us who play in these spaces to recognize and understand that just because it's not in the news every day doesn't mean we can stop with our efforts to beat it back and defeat it. And I fully expect this will take a while. I'm also proud of the work that's been done in Massachusetts. It's been nationwide, in many cases, in its scope and its influence. But we're going to have to stay on this one for a long time to ultimately get to where we want to go, which is to a point where we are doing all of the things in these 4 spaces that are required to ensure that we don't lose thousands of people here in Massachusetts and in every other state around the country during the normal course. I mean, it's astonishing when you think about the number of lives that have been lost over the past 15 years on this, and how much work we still have left to do to get to the point where people aren't waking up every day all over Massachusetts and all over this country struggling and dealing with this terrible epidemic. And I thank you all for your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Baker. We have some time for some questions. Do people have any questions? Pat?
Good morning, Governor Baker. Good morning, Lieutenant Governor Pluto. My name is Patrick Kent. I'm the Director of Emergency Department Recovery Services at Gosnell. question pertains to recovery coaches or recovery navigators embedded in ERs. Funding for these programs are largely provided through grants and donations. My question is, do you see an opportunity in the future for this service to be reimbursable through insurance?
I think part of the reason we want to make it credentialed is so that we can bake it into the insurance system. Yeah, the answer is yes. But it's very hard to bake it into the insurance system when you literally have a dozen different ways of defining what it means to be a recovery coach. And frankly, some programs that train people in a very sophisticated and comprehensive way to become recovery coaches. In other cases, people literally just say, I'm paying it forward, you know, I'm in recovery myself, I'm a recovery coach. It's got to be a little more than that.
Yeah, Governor, I have a question for you. In general, has there been a lot of pressure put on the insurance industry to help these folks pay for it? Because I know a lot of the treatment from start to end is private pay. That'll address those that get assistance, and that'll address those that have the funds. But middle America is really being left out in some of the insurance benefits that would help these folks along.
So, I never know how much of the insurance conversation is anecdotal, comprehensive, even true in some cases. We have pretty structured statutes in Massachusetts around coverage for these services, and it's a 14-day length of stay mandated, okay? And I hear all the time that that's violated, and then I ask people to give me specific examples of it, and it kind of disappears when I start pulling the string on it. I actually think the bigger problem we have is not the inpatient stuff, which is where most of the private pay ends up. It's what happens after that, which takes us back to Patrick's question. Part of the reason for credentialing recovery coaches is the aftercare piece of this is, for the most part, reimbursed in a very haphazard way. And I think that's the part that we really need to create structure around. If you look at a lot of the data we've collected, and we've added, by the way, 1,100 treatment beds since we took office, 1,100, okay? The biggest problem we have at this point is not that we don't have beds. The biggest problem we have is that people are just rolling in and rolling out of them. And there are a lot of folks who literally do 3 trips a year, 4 trips a year. And that's because we're not doing the job when they come out that we need to do to help them stay clean after they come out of a detox or a residential program. And that, we're not going to solve that until we create some reimbursable models that are clinically what I would call sort of best practice. And that's why we want to create the credentialing program around recovery generally. Because until we do that, we're not going to have the structure in place that we can take to the carriers and say, this needs to be reimbursed. Department of Public Health and the Division of Insurance are both very aggressive if they get told about somebody who's on the carrier side who's violating that 14-day rule. Yeah.
Hi, Julie Bay, Martin Senior Community Services. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to make a comment, and that is that the opioid crisis really hit the island hard. Back in 2016, we had 6 fatal overdoses. And I want to thank Richard and the Gosnell community in particular for the relationship we have with them. We have instant access to detox beds. In the past, it was almost impossible to get somebody through the logistics of the ferry and everything else to a detox bed somewhere on the mainland. And since 2016, when we put this in place with Gosnell, we have been able to get people in virtually overnight. And the reason they get there virtually overnight or within 24 to 36 hours is that through Mary Sutter, Secretary Sutter's office, we started a recovery coach program funded by the Department of Public Health, and our recovery coaches accompany them on the ferry to get to Gosnell and back. So we're slowly cobbling together responses on the island. We have a new urgent care center thanks to the Department of Health, and all the resources that have come here. We really are very appreciative of that.
The word recovery coach keeps coming up over and over again, doesn't it?
It does. They're amazing.
I just want to follow up on that. This is a, we talk about this in terms of the numbers that we know. One of the things that we did a few years ago was start to collect data so that we can really understand what's happening to individuals in our Commonwealth. But what we don't measure is the amount of recovery, the amount of success. So I do want to just credit all of you for your community-based responses that are saving so many lives, and so many more are living in recovery successfully here in this Commonwealth. I want to just thank the governor for his leadership. I think there's 46 other states that are adopting the plans that we have here in Massachusetts into their states. And while that 72,000 person number is real and significant, we're one of the brightest spots in the country because of what we're doing. So I can't emphasize that enough, how important it is what you're doing. I know we have a lot of emergency responders, police officers, chiefs here in this room. You've been seeing this for a very, very long time. And then with Narcan saving lives for that moment. And doing something very different than what you're sort of trained to do, which is to hold people accountable for breaking the rules or breaking laws, and rethinking your strategies. And instead of arresting someone and creating a record, you're diverting people into programs, you have partnerships, you're following up, and you're doing amazing work at the grassroots level. And I just want to credit the chiefs and all the emergency responders and police officers here in this room, the sheriffs and the DAs for really, really working hard on that front. It's extraordinary what you're doing. And just a credit to the chiefs who are here for your advocacy on the municipal police training, for the dedicated source of funding. It's needed. You have so much on your plate to deal with, and we're very grateful. I'd just like to hear from you on that, but also with over 80% of the deaths in Massachusetts, including a fentanyl, synthetic opioid element, what is your thinking locally about how we can do more on that end as well? Chief Frederickson.
Good morning.
Hi, Chief Frederickson.
Good morning. Everybody good today? The recovery, the approaches you're taking have been remarkable. I know locally we've seen, knock on wood, I won't tell you the number reduction, but it's pretty good. And what's also a nice indicator is the average age is rising, so that's a non-scientific data that indicates that the younger people are probably not overdosing as much as they were a few years ago. However, all the recovery and stuff, it's great, but we still have that black hole of prevention, and it seems like it doesn't, we haven't hit the sweet spot on how to do that. I think that a lot more effort should be put towards that. I don't pretend to have the answer, but I think you guys.
You know, Kevin Rosario's in the room. He's going to call him out on this one. I asked you that question when I came in the door. I said, what can we do on prevention more so? And you said we have to start younger. As a mother of a 15-year-old now and a 13-year-old soon, I think I'm in the sweet spot, unfortunately, for that age group that is so vulnerable. Maybe you can speak to some of the strategies that you're working on.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for catching me as I was sliding by. I appreciate it. So, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Rosario. I'm the Director of Community Outreach. And first, thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for taking the time. Thank you, Gosnell, for coordinating this. And for all you guys in here, I know from being in the community, it seems like over and over and over, you see the same folks, you see the same stuff every day. And back to, Lieutenant Governor's point, you don't see the folks that you helped that stay well, that never come back. And really, please, if you take nothing else away, take away that people are getting well, and what you do matters, and you are making an impact in this collaboration between all the people that are doing amazing work. Governor Baker and your administration is having an impact. As a person in recovery, I meet the guy that overdosed multiple times and then finally bought into it and is starting to get well. and they may not come back around and say thank you for that, but I thank you for the work that you're doing. So the school thing, Gosnold and many other people have been very active with doing community-based education forums. Patty and her team getting into the schools with school-based counseling, and sporadically schools have said, oh, we want to do an event. Well, could you come speak to this group of individuals? And we do, and the recovery coaches do as well, and it's great, but the idea that we have is it has to be almost like a curriculum-based thing. It can't be a once a year, once in a while thing. It has to be reinforced by the students, by the teachers, by the families. We have to bring the families in and educate the families, because often you can speak to a student, but the family is almost more important than the student, because we're relying on them and their guidance. And if they don't believe what we believe about the development of the brain, at risk, and identifying risk factors, genetic predisposition, underlying mental health issues, they are not prepared to deal with their young ones either. So I think if we continue to communicate and have these forums and we make it something in the school that as early as 5th grade, they call me sometimes to speak to seniors, and I'm like, seniors? I think of senior Kevin Rosario. I would have told Kevin Rosario, see you later, and had a beer after class. Like sometimes they have habits. They're ready to go hit the workforce. Like you talk about first time use, people in recovery often say, the sweet spot is 12, 13, 14. I had my first drink, I smoked my first joint, peer pressure, self-esteem, really developing your personality is so vulnerable. So 5th grade, 6th grade, you start to have the conversation, age appropriate, language appropriate, subject appropriate, and then we revisit it again in junior high and middle school. And then it should be a curriculum that's like when high school stops, orientation, hey, welcome to school. I know you're afraid. There's going to be a lot of challenges and struggles, and let's have this conversation. Here's the resource, and to continue it and continue. I don't want to, keep you guys hostage. I'm obviously passionate about this stuff. But I'm told time is up. So I appreciate you guys. I need someone to follow me around and tap me on the shoulder. So again, thank you all. Thank you both for your time, and I appreciate the effort and the work you've already done. Thank you.
So we have $10 million in the final deficiency to do school-based counseling on this stuff. And I'm looking at the members of the legislature on this one. We'll make sure they know where it is, and we'd love to see that make it through. We agree, we do have to create more structured programming around that. Yeah.
Good morning, Governor. Thank you for the work you do. My name is Jamie Reed, and I say part of the story is I lost my son last year to a fentanyl overdose, and it's been hard. Now I'm left with raising his children and navigating that. I'm hoping towards retirement, and those plans have changed. And I'm okay with it, but working within this system as a grandparent, how I got to raise my grandchildren is I got a call from DCF, and they first thought I was my son, and that was horrifying, absolutely horrifying. We didn't get off on the right foot on that, and they gave me a couple hours to come and pick up the girls at daycare, and I have to commend the daycare people because my son's the mother of the children relapsed, and she had him in daycare, and I was able to do that, and I'm in a shape where I can actually work with kids. But working with DCF and some of the other agencies at the state level is not easy. So as we think of this, and having some funds available to have the grandparents, because a lot of grandparents are raising the kids. That's something just to keep on the radar. Thanks for the good work you do.
Thank you.
One more quick question, and then Al.
No, I just wanted to speak a little bit to what Governor Baker, what you were talking about, Kevin, as well, about education. I think a lot of what you talked about families and medical problems and not having the same kind of understanding in the community is certainly a struggle. I think that paired with early education is very important. I think families, children, the earlier we can educate around this, the better. The more we can hit even the mental health pieces in the younger ages, because sometimes
it isn't always the curriculum to talk about substance abuse, but to talk about bullying and self-esteem issues, and the more that we can address those, the less likely they are later in life to turn to substances, because they know that there's other things and other people that they can turn to. So I just wanted to kind of piggyback on both of those, that education with parents, education with the community, the family, it's so very important. I think that's one of the things that we at Gosnell have kind of realized, is that there's still a lot of education that needs to be done out there, so the more that we can do and promote it in different ways, the better. Yeah. So I think we all have that.
And Allie oversees the Gosnell. They were
sorry?
in 17, they were in 17 schools. She just told me this yesterday. They have school-based counseling that Gosnell offers. So during the school day, she oversees the program. They were in 17 schools at the end of the 16-17 school year, you told me, and going into this year, they're in 52 schools.
Yeah.
So,
Allie Anderson, I'm the Chief Clinical Officer.
they have kids from in talking to some people, they have kids who come to school and they don't know if they're going home or if they're going to foster care. It's just a really difficult situation on how you do what you do every day.
I think on that follow-up, just so on the screenings that are being done in our schools, I think we've screened about 22,000 students, educating more of the school staff around detecting the warning signs for addiction and to intervene earlier on. Obviously, we need to build on that, but then there's going to be a call from more of your services to help these individuals and families too, so thank you.
I have to say that it must take a huge team to manage the governor and lieutenant governor, and we've received our cue from this mysterious room on the side that we should call it a wrap. So I just wanted to put that out there, that's happening. That's happening right now, and I'm getting the cues.
Well, I can,
So leave it up to the governor.
the final thing I would say here is that when the LG and I were campaigning back in 13 and 14 and hearing about this, there was a tremendous amount of angst and sadness and horror about all this, but there weren't a lot of things that people were talking about and saying, well, you know, this seems to be working, we should do more of it. And if I had to pick the one glimmer of hope I take from then versus now is, and some of it came up in this conversation, is I do hear people talk about things that are working. I didn't hear anybody talking about anything that was working in 2013 and 14. I mean, it was like a wasteland. And it's very hard to find hope if you can't come up with some things that you can talk about where you can say, you know what, we tried this and it seems to be working, we should do more of that. And that is something we've tried to do both on the state side with funding and programming, but also with some of the changes in the legislation. The whole reason we went so hard on the recovery coach piece is because it was really clear to us that on the grant stuff and the donation stuff that people were doing, it was working. So we need to do more of that. And then some of the school-based stuff, same thing, it seems to be working. We should do more of that. And I take some comfort in the fact that we finally have a few things that people can talk about and say, you know what, that works, and we should do more of it. And that's absolutely the way we think about how we go forward on this, continuing to find things that work and then double up on them. And you guys have all played a big role in that, a really big role in that, and we appreciate it. Thank you.